Looking at today's readings, there's a constant theme that runs through them, a theme of choice and the results of choices. The writer of Jeremiah reminds us that those who choose to trust in human ways and turn away from God are like a barren bush languishing in a dry desert. They are unfruitful because they stand in a lava waste and an empty earth. On the other hand, those who choose to trust in God are like a well-watered, deeply rooted tree. They show no distress in years of drought, but still bear fruit. The psalm continues the analogy of the fruitfulness of those who hope in God. They are like trees planted near running water that yield fruit in due season. It suggests that God watches over the way of the just, but the way of those who choose wickedness vanishes. And let's hope so. 1 Corinthians reminds us that if we choose to believe that Christ has been raised, then our faith is firmly based and deeply rooted. Christ being the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. In the gospel we attribute to Luke, we have a version of the Beatitudes which, upon careful comparison, is rather different from the more familiar Beatitudes presented in Matthew. In Matthew 5, the Beatitudes are part of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is seated on the mountain and the people are below looking up at him. Thus, these Beatitudes appear as a higher law, something to hopefully aspire to. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The hungry thirst not for food, but for righteousness. In Luke's Sermon on the Plain, Jesus has come down from the mountain. He is among the people at eye level, or perhaps even looking up at them because he has knelt down to touch someone who is sick or lame. This is not a sermon of lofty and perhaps unattainable goals. These Beatitudes appear to be immediate, everyday, and inseparable from the joys and sufferings of life. These blessed are just plain poor and hungry. We cannot look past their needs to see something loftier. There is no pure in heart in the Sermon on the Plain. This is a gospel for hard living in the down and dirty of daily life. These Beatitudes are not about our aspirations to godliness. They're about a community of disciples standing with the grieving, the poor, and the hungry, just as Jesus did, and just as Jesus still does. They are about choosing to practice and bring about the presence of Jesus through our own acts of care and compassion. Immediately after the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew has Jesus declaring that his disciples are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. But the Sermon on the Mount is followed by a series of woes. Woes to the rich, the satisfied, and the laughing haughtily, if they choose not to recognize the needs of others. The contrasts are stark. Sorry about the mess on the papers. The contrasts are stark. The poor will receive the kingdom of God, but the rich have already received their consolation. The hungry will be satisfied, but those who are well satisfied will go hungry. The weeping will laugh, but the laughing will grieve. Again, it seems to be a matter of choice. Those of us who have enough, or more than enough, as my recent downsizing has shown me, can continue to gather and hoard and increase our wealth. Or we can choose to make efforts to relieve the sufferings of those who are poor and hungry. Those of us who are at peace and living relatively joy-filled lives can choose to reach out to those who are grieving, frightened, marginalized, or alone. This is just what Jesus did. He came down from the mountain. He lived among the people, the poor, the hungry, the weeping. He reached out to relieve their pain and suffering, their hunger and fear, their grieving and marginalization. He asks us, and indeed expects us as his disciples, to do the same. May we remember that Jesus walks with us and empowers us to do this work. May we choose to be the fruitful trees that get our strength from the river of God's love.